This is a special segment for Patreon. I wanted to talk about critical race theory. It's a super controversial topic. You can see why it's Patreon only. I understand both sides of this war. So on the left, they either agree with critical race theory, which basically states, I'm going to simplify it, that every interaction is a form of power struggle, and that power is determined by your historical oppression. So you look at someone's race and gender and other immutable characteristics, and then someone you don't know will decide for you how much privilege you've had and what the imbalance in that interaction is. And their goal is to right that imbalance because they've already imputed an injustice into that interaction. So that it sounds crazy when you say it, but that is literally what they believe. And so some of them actually understand that, and that is what they're fighting for. So it's kind of a form of reparations if you think about it. So it's like, hey, look at all these power imbalances. We've decided, we've done the math, so you don't have to. And now we're going to right each wrong. And they're not looking at the individual. Who knows if you've had poverty, you've been sick, you're an immigrant, as long as they can judge you by your physical characteristics, which literally is bigotry. That is actual bigotry. By judging a book by its cover, all the things you weren't supposed to do, all the things Martin Luther King told us not to do, judge by the content of the character, not the color of the skin. That's exactly what they do. So they do the exact opposite of MLK. That's the philosophy. So, they're going to right these wrongs based on their own, sort of religious or semi-quasi-religious doctrine. Others genuinely believe that this is an anti-racist movement, and all these good-hearted people are trying to teach about race and our history in a more honest way, which is actually a really noble goal. Yeah, the history books were written by winners. The history books aren't accurately representing slavery and all these other things. Those are all 100% true, but that's not what's happening. These are people seizing power, and they're using something far, far more cynical. But there are a lot of people on the left who just haven't delved deeply, and I don't blame them because this stuff is so esoteric. It's not for the regular person who's got a life and a job and kids. And the third thing, a lot of people on the left just don't fully understand it. They tend to believe the people they trust. So they'll, if they watch Rachel Maddow and whatever she says, that's going to be their opinion. And that's what I find mostly at cocktail parties or wherever it is that I go these days. And it's not even worth engaging because you realize you dig just a little bit beneath the surface. It doesn't take more than 2 questions. And you realize that this person just took all of their opinions off the shelf from whichever channel that they watch or news that they read. And the right sees critical race theory as this Marxist Trojan horse that's carrying racism and apartheid and all kinds of discrimination as its payload, which is true. It is very Marxist in nature because Marxism is all about power struggles, the oppressed proletariat. So it's a class struggle, not a race and gender struggle as CRT does. So it's effectively the same methods. And they've even talked about it. I played a clip in a previous episode. The woman who got kicked out of BLM, who was one of the co-founders, Patrisse Cullors, because she started buying up tons of houses with millions of dollars of donations to BLM because they're not actually helping anybody. So she got booted from there. But she was quoted as saying, look, we're trained Marxists and this is a Marxist movement. I think the right has a point. The question is one of degree and influence. I think the people in the middle don't matter, honestly. And I am typically one of those people on a lot of subjects because there's just not enough time to get involved with everything. There's not enough time to have an opinion on everything. You can't, you have to live your life. So most people in the middle just are slowly waking up and they're starting to see some of this surface at their schools, or, if they have a white kid, they have to sit in a separate place, or they have to apologize to a black kid that they barely even know because of historical oppression. It's really devious what's happening. And I think people are starting to wake up to it, especially in school and media where it's most prevalent. This is a teacher who breaks down what's happening in these schools. I'll play you a short clip. It's about 1.5 minutes.
I'm the science coach and admin in the largest public school district in Indiana. I'm in dozens of classrooms a week, so I see exactly what we're teaching our students. When we tell you that schools aren't teaching critical race theory, that it's nowhere in our standards, that's misdirection. We don't have the quotes and theories as state standards per se. We do have critical race theory in how we teach. We tell our teachers to treat students differently based on color. We tell our students that every problem is a result of white men, and that everything Western civilization built is racist. Capitalism as a tool of white supremacy. Those are straight out of Kimberly Crenshaw's main points, verbatim in Critical Race Theory, the writings that formed the movement. This is in math, history, science, English, the arts, and it's not slowing down. If students of color have lower reading scores, it's because of inequity. Therefore, we take from the white students and give to the color students. That's Richard Delgado, straight out of CRT and Introduction. All teaching is political, with reality and facts taking the back seat. That's Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings, who outlined how she saw critical race theory fleshed out in public schools in 1995. When schools tell you that we aren't teaching critical race theory, it means one thing. Go away and look into our affairs no further. It isn't about transparency, it isn't about cultural relevance. It's race essentialism, painted to look like the district cares about students of color. We call it anti-racism, so you feel bad if you disagree with our segregationist pedagogy. It's taking advantage of kids' vulnerability and parents' inactivity to preen over social snake oil schemes designed to create division. Parents, when we tell you critical race theory isn't taught in our schools, we're lying. Keep looking.
He might be a partisan, but look up those books, see for yourself, refute the facts if you need to. So the question is, who's right, the left or the right? Like some of the people on the left, I don't think we're at a state of emergency yet that's being portrayed by the right, because look, a lot of these people are partisans and they know that if they create this burning platform and create this sort of perception of an emergency, they get people to act, especially when you're dealing with kids. Oh my God, you cannot fuck with people's kids. There's probably a better way to say that, but you cannot mess with kids. People just get ferocious and crazed about everything, and rightfully so. So I think they're pressing the right button, or the right is pressing the right button. But the theory and its offshoots are extremely dangerous. I truly believe that. They are authoritarian. They're divisive. I've talked about it in previous episodes. I've talked about it with Glenn Lowry especially. And these are shades of everything that I escaped with my family. Like I came here as a kid from the Soviet Union. And this is exactly what it was like there, in the sense that you could not say certain things. Like you knew the things you were being forced to say were lies, but you had to say them to keep your job and to not get canceled. Or, they're canceled could mean being disappeared. But here we're slowly getting to that point because the government is now enforcing a lot of these untruths. And you see these talking points being talked about all the time, and they're making their way into policy. So slowly I see the Soviet Union sort of sprouting up in our own country. And I hate it, honestly. I really hate it. You come here, succeed or fail, America's strength is its indifference. It doesn't care. You do your job, you pick the thing that your skills are best suited for, and you can kill it here, and you can be rubbing elbows with Puffy or with Elon Musk or whoever else because you found a way to use your skills and abilities and hard work to get somewhere. Not everyone gets there. Some people fail, and I think we should have ways to help people out who do. But the promise of America, to us at least, when we came over, was never, hey, we're going to create justice for you. The government is going to give you all this stuff. No, there were some programs that helped us out. They were mostly privately funded programs and some local community stuff. Food stamps, although I was on food stamps, I think we had family who were. And that stuff is really hard, but ultimately, the country wasn't going to put you over the top. It wasn't going to make you successful. You had to do it yourself. And that's all people want. That's all people of any race, gender, whatever classification system you want to use. That's all they want. They want that chance to succeed. And look at all the people that are fighting to get to this country every single year, from the southern border, from all these other nations, from Nigeria, from Eastern Europe, all these countries. They don't believe this is the worst place in the world like you would think we are based on some of the critical race theory stuff. I've been following all the legislation that's happening on CRT. Some of it is good, some of it is terrible. And the question is, am I for banning it or against it? Tentatively, I was leaning for bans with some caveats. Here's the pro-banning argument. Taxpayers should decide what curriculum their kids learn. And that was actually the reason that the governor race was lost by McAuliffe, because he basically said, oh, parents shouldn't be able to decide what their kids learn in school. That's insanity, and it's a losing message. Also, teachers are not equipped to teach CRT critically. If you are to teach CRT, it needs to be taught at college level because it's a very esoteric theory. You can't just take the outputs of it, which is this, power balance thing, and apply it, because then you're indoctrinating. You're not teaching a critical way to look at it. Here's the alternative theories. What are the pros and cons? Then you're actually learning because you're debating it rather than being indoctrinated by its outputs. Right now, students lag in basic math, science, and reading, and we're focusing on something dumb beyond belief. It's one thing if we ran out of stuff. If everyone is doing so great on the basic subjects that we've now got all this extra time and all these extra resources to teach people about all their historical crimes that they didn't perform themselves. But now, we're ranked 34th in the PISA scores. Teachers' unions have already committed to CRT advocacy, and we cannot have advocacy among teachers. Maybe I shouldn't say that as a blanket statement. I think there's some things worth advocating for. It should not be ideologies. It should be for more supplies. It should be for better resourcing. It should be for competition in schooling, but that's not what teachers' unions do. I'm going to do a whole episode on that. The teachers' unions have failed us badly, especially during COVID. They sat out basically 2 years when every other developed country, the kids went to school. It's really inexcusable. CRT is divisive and racist, so that is a pro-ban argument. And it slips very quickly into morality and values that parents should be teaching, or religion, or whatever method you're using to educate your kids. You can't have teachers with their own ideologies replacing what you should be doing in the home. That's where values should be taught. And I think they could be reinforced at school, but parents got to be on board. They have to. Now, the argument against the bans on CRT, first, many of these laws are written really poorly. Like some of these bills ban actual words. You could almost say they're trying to avoid the topic of race in general, or they're trying to not address things that should be addressed. It's hard to define what is and is not CRT. So I think they've taken on something very nuanced, because the theory itself, I did a decent job explaining it, but there's a lot of manifestations of it. So it's very hard to pinpoint. So you could find it being taught even when there's a ban. And it perpetuates partisanship. So instead of winning people over on the merits of your arguments of real anti-racism, like MLK, you're fighting against this thing that sort of looks like you're fighting to maintain racism. So it's bad optics, even though sometimes you have to take the risk of bad optics or the risk of being called a name to do the right thing. And I think when it comes to kids and education, I think that's one of those cases. And the other argument against these bans is no alternative is being offered. You have to acknowledge why so many people are compelled to this theory. So many people are broken or don't feel like they have a place in this world or opportunity or whatever. And yes, it's bad to misdirect it at others and say, oh, because you're this color or this gender, you're keeping me down. That's objectively untrue in 99% of situations. But the fact that people feel this way is something to be addressed, or people feel that certain things aren't being taught in school, or we're not addressing race in the right way. That's a discussion to be had, but someone or this collective of people needs to put out a better vision. So we're lacking vision in this battle, and maybe that's to come. So maybe I'm being a little bit unfair because the battle is pretty new. And this is the dumbest argument I've seen, that people on the left or this far, far left, the CRT people, are saying, well, it's a free speech argument. You can't ban teachers from speaking. No, okay. There's no free speech. Kids are minors and they're captives of government institutions and parental mandates. So parents must decide. School is not a free speech zone. School is mandated and they're forced to be there. I don't think the teachers union realizes the kind of damage they've been doing between CRT advocacy and COVID and sitting out 2 years of schooling. I think they've ruined themselves because I think people now are looking to either move to places where they can get better schooling for their kids or homeschooling or whatever. I think homeschooling is through the roof now. So they better wake up and they better start focusing on STEM and the things that matter, not this bullshit, this culture war bullshit. So how do you fight it? I wasn't a fan of what was being done because what was being done is a very partisan battle where a lot of right-wing victories in red states pushed back CRT in schools. So they've created bans in schools. They've kind of popularized it in mainstream culture. One guy who's been very effective at this is Corey DeAngelis, and he's helped change my mind in some ways. The blue states are still behind, but I think even they are starting to catch up. I think people are seeing how badly schools are failing in California and they want to take their kids out or educate them separately. Also, people are seeing this in corporate. Like they're being, there's a trainer, I think I played the clip on one of the previous episodes, that was talking about how you're the white devil.
All white people are racist. So I put this up because I really want any white person in the room to know up front that this is what we're dealing with, that it's not going to be this coddling of white tears and what that looks like. We're not going to discuss, oh, maybe some of us have worked it out. No, you're always going to be racist, actually. So even when you're on your path to trying to figure out how to be a better human being, because I believe that white people are born into not being human, like that actually instead of people of color and black folks being dehumanized, that actually everyone is dehumanized off rip within white supremacy, that y'all are born into a life to not be human, and that's what y'all are taught to do, to be demons. So in this particular way, white people are all racist. So I just want
corporations are paying for it, not because they believe it, but because they want to check a box and cloak themselves in wokeness so they can keep doing what they were doing. I don't think much progress has been made in corporations or in blue states or in big cities. That kind of looks like losing to me, or looked like losing, but I'm not so sure now. Originally, I thought there were two mistakes that are being made. The wrong people were leading the charge. We unfortunately live in a world where cosmetics matter. So the reason the right clings on to Candace Owens is because the left has made race and gender such an issue and such a defining thing about a person that they can't field a team of old white men, which is the typical right-wing team. It's old white dudes. So Candace Owens is a gem. I would not be surprised if someone tried to do something to Candace Owens. Mitch McConnell was thrown to take a bullet just to protect her because she's more valuable than all those old white dudes in the Senate combined. It's the same thing with string theory. You get Neil deGrasse Tyson to explain it and everyone's going to pull up a chair. I start explaining it, even if I do a spectacular job, not as many chairs, a lot of empty ones. So the messenger matters. Yeah, that's the game that we're playing, and the right knows it and the left knows it. It's just a game and we're just chum in the middle. So I think better messengers are out there. People like Chloe Valdry, John McWhorter, Thomas Chatterton Williams, Glenn Lowry, who's been on the show. All these people who are young, mostly, eloquent, highly educated thinkers, builders, and they can deliver an alternative point of view, an alternative message, an alternative philosophy to what I think is so divisive and so destructive about CRT. And I thought it would be difficult to explain what CRT is. And I still think a lot of people who are against it for the wrong reasons, not because they understand the philosophy, but because some other right-wingers that they watch or listen to told them that it was wrong. And they created this esoteric boogeyman. What I thought would be much more valuable is to use the terminology of the civil rights movement, because it is a violation of your civil rights to be taught an ideology at your place of work, or to have your kids separated by race or gender, or have them be apologizing for things they didn't do. So those are things that are racist, apartheid, discriminatory, all those things. So I thought it would be better to market it that way. But seeing the success this is having, I'm backtracking on it a little bit. They're converting a lot of people who still don't understand and couldn't explain what CRT is. And maybe that's okay. Like, if you do the right thing for the wrong reasons, is that good? I guess on balance it is, but I would love to have more people do the right thing for the right reasons and have that depth. And neither people on the left or the right have that for the most part. And another strategy I thought would be good to push back on CRT is to do more private meetings at major universities, to at least have universities converted and get strength in numbers among that faculty who are typically traditional liberals. They like debate. They like free speech. Those are their principles, but they're afraid. So they don't speak out, or they're being forced to say things that they don't believe. So I think having those private meetings at corporations with workers, with representatives of universities who are like-minded, once they're emboldened and have this strength in numbers, that will create an internal pushback within these organizations. So will the students, but they're afraid. They're afraid to speak up, and I can't blame them. I feel like hijacking the acronym CRT and turning it into critical reciprocity theory, where instead of power and immutable characteristics being central to every exchange, wouldn't it be better if it was reciprocity, which is the degree to which each party exchanges mutual value. So everyone has this win-win interaction and also relationship on an ongoing basis. So that's what I would love to see. And I did a whole episode on reciprocity. I do sometimes wonder if the time spent fighting CRT and wokeness and all this culture war stuff wouldn't be time better spent building a better vision. Because it's really, at least for me, it's very uninteresting to have a conversation about what you're against and not what you're for. What do you represent? What are your ideals? What are your principles? What do you want to teach kids in school? And so what it becomes is this sort of broken utopian cosplay, where everyone puts on their costume and they're doing their little dance and they're playing their parts and their characters. Even if you win an argument, what did you actually win? Did you actually help anybody? In general, a lot of people are broken, and they need to feel useful, and they need to feel like they're achieving in life. And there are meaningful ways to do that, and we're not accomplishing that. That's why people are latching on to these theories, because it gives them villains. It gives them a righteous way to look at their own failures, or to look at how others have failed them, instead of internalizing it and saying, hey, I'm going to refocus on things that I can do better and have a better life for myself. They're not doing that because they're being paralyzed by a philosophy that looks outward and says, hey, look at all these people that are doing you wrong. It's really destructive. It's destructive to the soul, destructive to the country, destructive in so many ways. Maybe, and this is what I'm starting to evolve to, you need this multi-tiered attack. You have to attack the symptoms, which is all this stuff that's happening in terms of, putting it into schools and all that. But at the same time, you can't stop looking for the cure. The cure is really important. And you also run the risk of what antibiotics ran into, right? Because we overuse them. We put them in soap, we put them in everything. So now they're not effective, and the germs found a way to work around the bacteria. So that can happen in a cultural sense, because the bacteria and the resistance becomes stronger, because you're never fighting and winning against the underlying root causes. You're always fighting the symptoms. And I think that's the risk here. Another thing is, there are better ways to teach history in general. So the way I would do it is in 3 steps. First, you have sort of a skeletal timeline of major events and facts, things that are indisputable, right? When someone became president, or an event that happened, a battle, whatever it is. The second is flesh out key points on the timeline with firsthand stories. For much of history, we have books, we have records of letters and things that were written by the participants in these timelines, and the principles on all sides, not just the slave, but the slave owner, the business owners of that time, people who lived in other places that were affected by the slave trade. All of these people surrounded from all angles wherever available, a full 360 perspective. And then third, have a critical discussion in their original and modern context. What I mean by that is a debate, saying, okay, let's debate it from the perspective of that time, and let's do our best pro and con arguments so everyone understands what the thinking was of that time, because now it's informed by actual history. And then see it in the modern context. So the modern context is saying, hey, let's take a step back from that time period and say, look, how do we view it today? How have things changed? How has society evolved? How have things gotten better or different? That is critical thinking. That debate is what's missing in this discussion. I would love to have Dan Carlin, who does the Hardcore History podcast, I would love to have him involved in designing this, because that guy is probably the greatest history teacher we've ever had. He is a national treasure. So if you haven't had a chance to check out the Hardcore History podcast, please do. And so where I started to come around is they are successfully pushing back. And this guy, Corey DeAngelis, is doing a spectacular job. So far, mostly on the right wing, but I think it's starting to seep into the middle because people are seeing their own kids and their own jobs affected by it. I still think there's a long way to go on teaching both the struggles and the progress that has occurred for the historically oppressed or underprivileged. So there is truth to that. I just think we need to piece this together better. I positioned it as the problem of opposers versus proposers. People who are proposing, they have the upper hand because there's usually a philosophy or a vision behind them, or at the very least an agenda. And then the opposers also just have an agenda, but typically not a vision. The other person who did a good post on this was Noah Smith. I'm going to read you a quick section. Progressives seem prepared to go down fighting for the idea that America needs to educate its young people about its fundamentally white supremacist character. So why am I putting the word history in quotes along with CRT in quotes? Because the version of quote unquote history that progressives want to teach young people, generally speaking, is a cartoonish story in which America is the villain, a nation formed from racism, founded the day the first slaves stepped on our shores, dedicated thereafter to the repression and brutalization of people of color. This quote-unquote history ignores America's deep and powerful tradition of anti-racism, the universalistic egalitarian ideals of the Declaration of Independence, the abolitionist movement that was present from the very beginning, the founders' conception of the U.S. as a nation of immigrants, America's role in ending of European colonialism, its position at the forefront of liberal democratic reforms and experimentation, the promotion of global standards of human rights following World War II, and so on. This is why it's so dangerous to have these ideologues present things this way. No individual is a concentrated vial of negativity where only bad things happen to you because you're of a certain race or gender or whatever. You would be dead, right? You would have killed yourself because obviously nothing but oppression everywhere you look. We are a cornucopia of pros and cons, of good and bad, some of them derived from those immutable characteristics and others coming from other things, sometimes situational, sometimes things that we learned. Maybe we had the benefit of a wise person in the household growing up, or maybe we had certain experiences that were really rough and that we overcame and that gave us grit. Whatever it is, we are this crazy combination of things. And to isolate these specific characteristics is so obtuse. It's so oversimplifying. It's insulting. It is purely insulting to our intelligence. And I really do hope people wake up. And what really bothers me is how much of this has made it over to the corporate world, because look, corporations are using this thing cynically because they're trying to check a box, but they're also trying this woke cloak to protect whatever it is that they need to protect about their business. And, and it's also given them a way to fire people because now you say the wrong thing. It's like, hey, we can whack you for that. It's a tool, right? If you're contributing a lot to the company and they want to keep you, they'll keep you. But you've just made it super easy for them to find something in case they don't want to keep you. And they can point to that little something, which is basically a weapon that's been handed to them because of CRT and these DEI initiatives. And now they can snipe you. So now the power has more power to take your empowerment away or your job away. That's the insanity. People need to push back, and I'm hopeful that we will. Condoleezza Rice actually did a very eloquent rebuke of this, and I'll play this for you now.
The whole issue of critical race theory and what is and is not being taught. I come out of an academic institution, and this is something that academics debate, what is the role of race and so forth. And let me be very clear. I grew up in segregated Birmingham, Alabama. I couldn't go to a movie theater or to a restaurant with my parents. I went to segregated schools till we moved to Denver. My parents never thought I was going to grow up in a world without prejudice, but they also told me that's somebody else's problem, not yours. You're going to overcome it, and you are going to be anything you want to be. And that's the message that I think we ought to be sending to kids. One of the worries that I have about the way that we're talking about race is that it either seems so big that somehow white people now have to feel guilty for everything that happened in the past. I don't think that's very productive. Or black people have to feel disempowered by race. I would like black kids to be completely empowered, to know that they are beautiful in their blackness. But in order to do that, I don't have to make white kids feel bad for being white. So somehow this is a conversation that has gone in the wrong direction.
That was beautifully said, and I think it's a good way to end this episode. Hope you enjoyed this. Please tell others about the show, and I will see you next time on the McFuture. There's so many culture war posts right now that it's kind of tiring. You know, I'm a bad activist. Once I say my piece and new information comes in that just supports my initial arguments, I'm not really going to engage. But there are people who are like pit bulls. Once they sink their teeth in, they're not letting go. They're willing to do the fight, the long fight, and I admire it. I think it's great, especially if I agree with the cause. But there's a lot of people fighting for dumb causes as well. There's a certain level of tenacity where you can tolerate repetition of the same exact topic, especially when you're getting paid. A lot of the people who are fighting these woke wars online or instigating them are employed by think tanks or other private institutions, so they're bankrolled to do this stuff. So you're doing it for free and you're a crappy sharecropper on Twitter, and these guys are getting paid. So it's not a great deal for you. So that's why it's not something I want to get involved in.